Hey everyone, this is Unit 3 discussion post. Um, it says, how does backward design promote authentic, valid, and reliable assessment? Um, I believe because backward design starts with the assessment and works its way backwards to the learning activities and the assessment, I think that's what makes it authentic and reliable is because you're starting with the end goal in mind. You're thinking about what do you want the students not only to know, but to understand. And in the Wiggins-McTighe text, the book, it talks about how when you start with the end goal in sight and plan your activities after that, you're really providing and doing activities that are going to give you that authentic assessment and show you how the students really not just know the material, but understand the material. When you plan your activities first, and you're a lot of times thinking, oh, what kind of fun, creative activities can I make to engage the students, but not a lot of times that they're authentic and reliable to what you want the students to really understand and be transferable. And that's what I got out of the Walters text is that they want and the articles is you want the material to be transferable and not just stay with almost like a skill and drill type of concept where you give them all these skills and you drill them on it and that's the end of it. You want those concepts to be transferable. And I think that's why backwards design promotes authentic and valid and reliable assessments is that you're starting with that what do I want them to really understand and be able to transfer to later lessons and to later activities and different concepts. It's not just okay, I want them to know this, and that's what it is. The backwards design says, where am I going? And then you think about how am I going to get there? Because every population, every school district, every state, even where I teach overseas, it's going to be different. The students that I teach overseas are very different than the students you might teach in New York or California or England or Brazil or really anywhere. So starting with that assessment saying, what do I want them to know and what do I want them to understand really is what I think what makes the assessment authentic and reliable and transferable, really. Um, what is challenging about creating valid and reliable sense assessments? I think what is can be challenging is to really understand that transferable aspect of it. Not just because a lot of us plan assessments saying, okay, at the end of this lesson, at the end of what do I want the students to know? And that's great, but I think what's something I learned is what do you want them to understand? And that's the more difficult, I think, aspects of planning those authentic assessments. It's not just what I want them to know, but to understand and to what to transfer to other areas, other concepts, and other ideas. I think thinking about that point of the understanding is what makes it difficult because a lot of times some of us don't think about that understanding and what makes it transferable, and that's what makes it difficult is delving deeper into the why, not the how. Thinking about the why do we do this? Why do we do certain things certain ways? Why do we perform in this way? Why do we develop in this way? I think that's what makes it tricky in developing authentic assessments. But I think if we just spend a little bit more time thinking about the why and the understanding more of what we want them to know, but what we want them to get out of it, I think that's going to help us in creating better authentic assessments. I think assessment is important in my teaching context because it's really it shows me what the students have understood and learned. The assessment really is the bread and butter of what we do. Is when it comes to performing or even just in a general elementary general music classes, we want them to look beyond just our class and apply it into other areas. And I think that's why it's important to my teaching, is I want to be able to do cross curricular and our students need to be global citizens. And how can I make them reach across content areas in my teaching context and in my context in my classroom? And I think that looking at the assessment, saying, what do I want them to understand from this composing unit or this unit on instrument families or composers or anything like that? I think that's really and why assessment is important to me. Because if I start saying, this is what I want them to get out of it. I want them to be able to, understand that music reaches beyond just my classroom, but it ties in with social studies and science and ELA with the text of songs and choral music and choir music. I think that for me, it's important to see, and my students being global citizens, that it's not just music is music in my class. It is social studies and science and math and all the other areas in ELA. And by starting with that assessment piece, I can more design better activities to make sure that my students understand the cross curricular and the transferable concepts that I talked a little bit about earlier. Um, what steps might I take to infuse ideas? Some of the ideas I really thought was great is using the rating scales. I've never thought about using a rating scale in my classroom, especially an elementary music classroom, and also rubrics. I have used rubrics when I taught middle school music. Not this past year, but 2 years ago for just a year to fill in, and I did use some rubrics, but I didn't wasn't really sure how to create them and how to make sure that they were effective in my classroom. And the Walters text was great about the ratings, the 5 point rating systems, and giving you some great ideas to incorporate that, as well as the rubrics that we read about in both the Wiggins McTighe book and the Walters text as well. I'm definitely going to take the tips and tricks from the Walters text about the 5 point rating system and make sure that they're very succinct, clear, short descriptors for my students and that they understand it. I do like using rubrics in my classroom. I like students to understand how they're going to be assessed and what they're going to be assessed on. But I think making sure that you have a rubric for you that maybe is a little bit more detailed as a teacher, but then giving students a more simplified version, especially for me in elementary school, a simplified version of how they're going to be assessed on certain projects and what they're going to be assessed on, so they can start to understand how their grade is coming about. And I think that's really important. I want students to know why they got a certain grade, and we give, at my school, we don't give grades. We give approaching, below expectations, approaching, meeting, and exceeding. But I still just want the students to understand how that translates into a meeting expectations or an exceeding expectations. I think using the rating system and the rating scale and using the rubrics are going to be really beneficial in my classroom to show students, the older students at least, the third, fourth, fifth grade students, and to get them to think about how to refine their work. I mean, on a composing unit that I did for stage one, that I'm using on my unit plan, I want students to use a rubric to understand and self-assess where they need improvements in their own composition that they're working on. I think that's a great way to do it. Um, and how does Unit 3 content align with the National Core Art Standards? I think the new National Core Art Standards are really closely related and tie in with assessment. I think they built, and when they created the National Core Art Standards, the new ones, they really thought about that backwards design in the sense and thought about what do we want the students to know, and let's work our way backwards and then come up with standards that are going to be easily transferable and aligned to the standards much better. Because in the end, there's a shift, there's been a big shift about assessment in the United States and standardized testing, and teachers are being evaluated on student assessment, and there's been a move towards that. In the two articles from the NAFME articles, it talked about how Tennessee was moving away from that process and coming up with a specific arts designed evaluation for those teachers, which I thought was really amazing that they're doing that, because it's not fair to teachers like music, art, PE are getting assessed on math, are being evaluated, on music, the math, and the English standardized testing. Why is it that we're getting evaluated on something that we don't even teach? But I thought that was really refreshing about how the move to the national core art standards really kept that in mind, because if you look at them, it has the enduring understandings and the essential questions built into those anchor standards. So they really thought about that transferable knowledge and about what they want students to understand, not just know, but understand. I think that's really a great shift in the music education in the United States going on, and that's something that I'm trying to bring to Kuwait, is that it's not about the skill of what you know, it's about the understanding. And that's why I've adopted the National Core Art Standards to use on my curriculum design in Kuwait. And that's why when I'm currently designing the curriculum, I'm thinking about those assessments and working our way backwards in the unit design. And we are using UBD, which I have used a little bit in college, but I think is a great program. I think overall, assessment is probably one of the most important things you can do. And if you think about, it all goes back to, like I said in the beginning, think about that end goal. What do you want those students to understand? Do you want them to understand how to read music? Yes, of course. but there's more that goes into that, in that concept. You want them to understand why, the social and environmental context of writing music. Why was a piece written? Was it written for a great war that happened? Was it written for social injustice? Was it written for, the death of a family, or a family member the person had in their life, or a specific social, environmental thing that's going on in their lives or in the world at that time? I think that's really why we start with the end goal and work our way backwards. And in Nick McTighe and Wiggins, it talks about that's really the most important thing is, and it goes back to not only assessing students, but assessing our own teaching practices. It goes back to how can we better meet the needs of the students. If we come up with assessments and then work our way backwards, then we can look at how the students did and constantly look and refine our own teaching practices. The students on this assessment didn't really get the understanding I was going for, and then you can look back and say, why didn't they get it? What didn't I do to make them understand what I wanted them to do? And then that's how a good teacher constantly is refining and changing their teaching practices and becoming a better educator for their students. I constantly look at not, oh, they got these questions wrong, it's their fault, they didn't study, they didn't remember. Why didn't they get it? What didn't I do to make sure they understood that? I think that's really important as teachers, is we need to constantly be looking and assessing our own teaching practices. And by doing this assessment and thinking of assessment first, it also is reflecting our own teaching practices. And that's why I think is really great about UBD, is it's not just about us as the students, it's about us as well as teachers, and reflecting on our own practices to make sure that we're constantly changing and refining and meeting the needs of every student. All right, thanks.